All right. Good morning, everybody. This is your Facebook meteorologist, Sean Bagden here, followed along with your Facebook meteorologist, Derek Centrone, and we are closely monitoring Hurricane Milton this evening as it is rapidly intensifying, completely obvious on satellite as we have a pinhole eye that has recently developed across the northern bay of Campeche this evening, and we're currently getting really high cold cloud tops developing around the center of circulation. Currently, west to east shear is inhibiting a little bit of development on the northern edge of the system right now, but the southern end is really blowing up at this time, and likely as this southern band of higher cloud tops continues to develop itself, it's going to continue to push this system to the south just a little bit, just enough that we're able to get the northern end of the system out of this high area of wind shear, this area of higher wind shear off to the north in the Gulf of Mexico, and that will likely lead to even more rapid intensification of the system, which we'll get into later as we get into the model runs and everything past the satellite here. So I'm going to hand it over to Derek right now, and he'll break down whatever he has to say about the satellite imagery right here while I pull up our next slide.
So just something I want to go over that was observed earlier on in the day with that double eye wall feature. That dual eye wall feature is completely gone now, as I had said in the post earlier. And we now have that really solid consolidated core in the center. And that's what the storm is building around right now. And over the last couple hours, we really saw that take off, even in the last few minutes here. Um, about an hour or so ago, we only really had a southern eye wall building because of that shear to the north of the system. But now that it seems to starting as bleh, sorry. Now that it seems to be pulling out of that shear a little bit, we're starting to see that eye wall wrap around the north side of it, and as soon as we get that fully consolidated eye wall in the middle, that's when we're really going to see that rapid intensification start, and it's almost going to stall out there for quite a bit. It's been in this spot for a very, very, very long time, almost since last night, and we expect it to continue to stay there for several more hours before it exits the Bay of Campeche. And we're expecting a major hurricane, a very strong major hurricane at that, by the time it is over the northern Yucatan. Sean, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree with you, Derek. Once Milton starts continuing to move off to the south and the east here, gets out of that shear, it's likely going to regain more of a symmetrical inner core here, and we'll likely see this thing take off. And I'm actually about to pull up the HAFS-B model right here. The HAFS-B model, we're going to compare this to current conditions right now across the Gulf of Mexico and what's going on with this storm. The latest observation we had with this storm was from the hurricane hunters, and it had the pressure down to around 979 millibars. This was quite a bit earlier today, and we have seen... Sorry about that, everybody. Just dropped my laptop there, but we're all good. We have seen significant improvement in satellite presentation of this system, of Milton, overnight tonight and recently, and likely have seen some pressure falls that were not noted by the hurricane hunters, especially since the hurricane hunters were seeing even 5 millibar drops in between passes here. So looking at the HAFS-B model right now, a 962 millibar low is not out of the question, given that we've had significant time in between when the hurricane hunters have passed and when this initialization is happening here. 962 certainly not out of the question, especially given that we have a completely clear concentric eye formation already in the last few frames on Hurricane Milton here. And the scary part with the HAFS-B right here is how strong it gets as it rolls over the Yucatan here. Likely only getting tropical storm force winds over the Yucatan here, such as in cities like Valladolid and Cancun, likely only seeing tropical storm force winds. Not sure what this island is here, but God bless your souls. I hope nobody lives on that island, but likely seeing a hit from a Category 5 hurricane. With the way these models, all jokes aside, with the way these models have been trending, especially on the 0Z model run this time through, we certainly would not put it past this storm to reach Category 5 status at some point in its journey across the Gulf of Mexico. And that energy is going to be transferred into the water, like we were saying on the last run. Doesn't matter what happens further down the line. If this becomes a Category 5 hurricane within 25 or 24 hours of the landfall of the system, I would be extremely worried about a landfalling storm surge of a Category 5 hurricane. So likely 20 plus feet. And the Hurricane Center has been talking about how that is a possibility here, saying their current storm surge forecast of 20 feet for Tampa Bay might be hedging on the low side, which is extremely concerning, especially since the storm surge barriers for Tampa Bay are only rated to 20 feet. If that gets over 21 feet and we add on 1 foot of that, we add on some higher wave heights or something like that, likely a devastating scenario, life-threatening, almost unsurvivable scenario for the concave bays here of the Gulf Coast of Florida. But this model run here, unlike past model runs, has been showing the storm intensifying even further through its northerly curve on its way towards Florida, which is quite interesting. Continues to rapidly intensify all the way pretty much halfway across the gap here as it reaches the loop current. And at this time, I think what it's picking up on here is that the loop current is currently a little bit on the colder side because of the leading disturbance that has been giving rain to Florida today. The thing that's very worrying, though, is there is an area of high pressure that is developing in between the two systems right now, which could lead to a regeneration of warmer waters through the loop current as Milton makes its way into the loop current here and could potentially have it maintain intensity for a little bit longer than the HAFS B is showing here, as it shows it rapidly decreasing in intensity before it makes landfall. In the HAFS B, it shows it almost as a Category 2 storm here. But honestly, we see a regeneration of the loop current happening before the system ends up making landfall on the Florida coastline. And obviously, interaction with the trough here, I'll bring in Derek to talk about that in a couple of seconds here. But as this joins with the trough axis that's going to be pushing it north, we'll likely see an expansion of the wind field. And as this system turns extratropical, likely before landfall into Florida, it will expand that wind field and also maintain the intensity of the storm, even if the loop current wasn't as warm as we were expecting it to be. Do you want to continue on from here, Derek?
Yeah. Sean, I was actually just trying to use the Dvorak method to measure our current wind in the system.
Sure. Let's go back to the satellite real quick.
That method's a complete dumpster fire. But yeah, I'll get back to that. I'll do a post update or something when I'm able to determine that, because for anybody who doesn't know, the Dvorak method is really, really hard to do on a computer because it's originally created on paper imagery. So trying to do it on a computer where everything's moving and everything's at different scales is quite a bit of a dumpster fire. But anyway, getting back to what Sean asked me to talk about is the trough interaction. So
Do you want me
as
to pull
this,
it up to 850 wins?
yes, that'd probably be the best.
Okay, cool. There you go.
So, actually, do you have the parent model that might show this on a little bit of a better scale?
Oh, sure. Has to be parent. Let me make sure we've loaded it in. Yes, we are loaded in on the parent.
So even though the trough might be a little bit hard to see on the
Let me
850
go to
millibar.
250 real quick,
Yeah, thanks.
or 200. There we go.
Yeah, that's your trough right there. So it's going to kind of be scooting up into the trough slightly, and it's going to be grabbed. First thing I'm noticing right now is that absolute unit of a jet streak over the Carolinas and Georgia. That's really what's going to aid in the ventilation of this and really keep it ripping as it makes landfall. Um, And even though it will start to get sheared before making landfall, something that people aren't necessarily taking into account here is the extratropical characteristics of these cyclones. Yes, these storms do get ripped apart when they move over land, but that only is really a factor if it's moving over land and not having much of an interaction with an upper air pattern. This one's absolutely going to be embedding itself into an upper air pattern, which will keep the intensity at hurricane force, possibly even Cat 2 force by the time it reaches the East Coast. And as it reaches the East Coast, it will also start to intensify a little bit more as it um, starts to move over the Atlantic slightly. And the biggest thing that we're looking at right now, though, is just how that wind field is going to expand here. Pull up the 850 millibar map while it
Already there.
maintains its intensity. The first thing you can notice is the wind field, and if you also pull up the precip map a little bit later, you can see how the wind field almost detaches from the center as it moves over there. That's that extratropical transition. And the main thing I'm worried about right now, this is still kind of uncertain, is if that 850 millibar will be able to reach the surface. If that is, we will be seeing sustained winds north of 90 miles an hour. As of right now, I'm expecting about 85, maybe a little bit less in that area. That wind is able to, or that 850 millibar area is currently covering at the surface. But if that is able to fully reach the surface, we could be seeing much stronger wind than that. But that is just something important to keep in mind: is not every hurricane behaves the same way, and one, not every single quote unquote hurricane that we have here will weaken as substantially as models show on landfall because of that extratropical transition. Right there, you can see that this is able to maintain its intensity.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with that, Derek. And now that we are talking about extratropical transition, I know a lot of you on the Gulf Coast of Florida have been pretty worried about impacts. We've been over those in previous posts: the storm surge, likely record, unsurvivable, all those words, Katrina like. We pulled those out. But we haven't really talked much about potential impacts to the east coast of Florida here. And there are definitely going to be impacts felt depending on how quickly this extratropical transition takes hold right here. And first, we have to understand why this band of higher winds, about 4,000 feet off the ground, exists. The reason for this is likely because you do have a trough axis. Your frontal boundary, we'll talk about it as a cold front. It's dropping south. Your storm, your Hurricane Milton, your tropical storm, subtropical storm Milton, whatever you want to call it, is moving north into that boundary. What's happening is these two are squeezing together. It's like pushing it's like a little fire hose or a hose that you'd have in your backyard. If you put your thumb over it, the velocity of the water coming out accelerates. And that is exactly what is happening here. You're getting the wind, the air squeezed between these two features here. And that is what's causing this acceleration of wind in between Hurricane Milton and its mid-latitude counterpart here. And as we look, we can see, at least in this model run, this is likely to change since we are about 4 days out from this actual solution happening. We'll break it down in future lives in a little bit more detail. But you can see right here along the Georgia coastline, down through Jacksonville, Palm Coast even, Flagler Beach, you can see that this area of higher wind aloft is interacting with the coastline. Now you're saying, oh, this is going to be aloft winds. It's aloft winds. What's it actually going to do, Sean? Well, these aloft winds in precipitation bands can find their way down to the surface as long as an inversion is not present, which is a stabilization with height, a little bit of warmer air with height. And we can clearly see that on our sounding here. We have warming of air with height if you are, well, let's see, I'd say 870 millibars, 875 millibars or higher, you start getting that warming of air with height, that stable layer aloft. Higher winds cannot break through that. The unfortunate thing for the west coast, the east coast of Florida here, the Atlantic coast of Florida, is a large majority of these higher winds that we're seeing in these model runs are below that 875 millibar height. And generally in this case, especially since we have a mostly saturated layer here, it does look a little bit dry towards the surface, so we'll be a little conservative. But we do see that we have, what is that, an 85 knot low-level jet that's located below your inversion height here. And I'm not going to bore you with the math or anything here, so we're going to do the math on the calculator right now, right in front of you guys. And we're going to assume that 80% of that wind makes it to the surface. If that is the case, you're looking at 80 mile an hour sustained winds making it down to the surface here. And these are people that are not expecting they're going to get anything because the land of Florida is going to save them. The trough interaction, the wind shear is going to save them from these higher wind gusts, these storm surges from onshore flow. That is not the case. You're going to have a lot of onshore flow happening here, especially across Jacksonville, the Palm Coast, Flagler Beach, all these areas, St. Augustine. They're going to be seeing likely 3 to 5 foot storm surges if this is to be the case. You're going to have a mid-grade Category 1 wind with a long fetch going across the Atlantic Ocean here, running right into the northeastern coast of Florida, likely causing 3 to 5 feet of storm surge. That would be light to moderate coastal flooding going on here, and potentially even more than that, given the fetch that we have. This is just something that is going to be a developing story as this system continues to develop and we see continue model trends developing, and we'll continue to get back to you on this potential threat along the northeastern coastline of Florida as the storm develops. We may be talking about potential evacuations on the immediate barrier islands and intercoastal waterways of the northeastern coast of Florida. What do you have to say about that, Derek?
I would completely agree with everything you just said, especially with the storm surge around here. If anybody's been in Florida here, you know we can't afford to have any more flooding because we had torrential rains these last couple days here, especially today. It was just, or yesterday now, technically. It was just completely pouring all day. And any kind of surge or freshwater flooding we're going to be getting here, there's not going to be any place for it to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree, Derek. And actually, what I want to bring up here, if I can, would be the GFS interpretation of what this rainfall is going to look like with this system, especially since it's going to be impacting already saturated soils and what that's going to be meaning for the communities across especially north and across of the I-4 corridor here. Looking at the forecasted accumulated precipitation here, we can clearly see that along and north of Milton's track across the panhandle here, or across Florida, you can see we get extreme rainfall totals. And Carolinas, you are not out of this as well, especially as we work with forecast shifts here. But you can see a wide swath of extreme rainfall totals developing off to the north side of Milton here. Now, looking at this model run, I honestly think our highest rainfall totals will be a little bit south of this, probably looking at Orlando and north up to like Ocala and Palm Coast, maybe up to St. Augustine area being the heaviest rainfall. I'd say this is more of an accurate representation of rainfall right here. Probably going a little bit even more south than this. Following the I-4 corridor, north through St. Augustine and Cedar Key likely getting the heaviest rain here. Some areas I've been seeing potential for 10 to 15 inches, with some areas locally upwards of 2 feet of rain across the north central Florida panhandle here. And given the current rainfall that is happening right now with this first wave that's coming through, flash flood guidance is going to be decreasing with this system. And as that decreases, the less amount of rain you're going to need to saturate the soil, have it get overwhelmed, and create significant flooding issues in the towns and cities of north central Florida here. We're already seeing flash flood guidance dropping down to the 4-inch range right now for a 24-hour period. And we're still talking about an additional 15, 20, maybe even 25 inches of rain during this tropical event here, which likely will produce significant flash flooding. Likely going to be seeing high water rescues across a lot of towns here. Unfortunately, just like we saw in Helene up in North Carolina, lots of high water rescues will likely be unfolding here across a narrow band along and just north of the I-4 corridor across the north central peninsula of Florida here. And again, the Savannah area, Charleston area, certainly not out of the question here that we could be seeing significant flooding as well, depending on where this trough axis, this cold frontal boundary we're talking about, is setting up. Because we're honestly talking about a kind of Helene-like scenario here, where you have a boundary set up just to the northwest of the system, and the system is pummeling Gulf and Atlantic moisture into this boundary. And the boundary is acting like the Appalachian Mountains in Helene. It's going to wring out all the moisture over one consolidated area, and it's going to cause likely disaster in a lot of those areas in that narrow band. What do you have to say about the flooding impacts of this, Derek?
I would 100% agree with all of that. And yeah, it really just can't be overstated. This should be taken as seriously as any other threat with this storm, just because of what I mentioned earlier with Florida not really being able to take on any more water. And this is something that a lot of people just don't prepare for, because a lot of people say, I live inland, I'm not going to get storm surge, the wind's not going to be that bad. You're going to be flooded out. Florida's full of rivers, lakes, ponds. Anything that can hold water is going to be flooding with a system like this. So even if you have a little standing water in your backyard or wetland or something, you need to be considering this as a major flooding event.
Absolutely. And just to bring up one of the comments we got a little bit earlier, there is somebody who is saying they're not worried because they're not near the ocean. They only have a small pond in their yard. Yes, you only have a small pond in your yard. The only problem with the small pond in your yard is if you get 2 feet of rain, and I know you have an embankment going into that pond in your backyard, it's going to fill up, more than 2 feet because it's going to take in all that surrounding water, and it is going to rise significantly and likely be a lake by the end of this event. And honestly, that is something you need to be very careful of, especially in Florida when you start getting winds like you're going to have with Helene here. Even inland, if you get tropical storm force winds, you're going to get debris building up on these water grates, these storm drains, these pond drainages,
Hey,
all these
Sean,
things like that. Yeah.
just in here, check your messages. I just saw something online. I saw microwave imagery saying that Milton just underwent a very rapid eye wall replacement cycle. Look at this microwave imagery.
Oh yeah, I saw that. It went under. It went through an eye wall replacement cycle a little bit.
Yeah, I thought that would be interesting to mention. And also for anybody who tries to use the Dvorak technique, just don't do it. I tried doing it and it's really, really inaccurate.
Absolutely. And just one last important thing I wanted to get across here with the storm drains and everything. What I was going through and talking about there was with these tropical storm force winds, you're going to get debris flying off these trees, off of houses, stuff like that. And it's going to end up near the storm drains. If you can clear those out, the better off you're going to end up being, because if these storm drains get clogged, that's not a win situation for anybody. It's going to cause backlog. If you get 2 feet of rain and you have a clogged storm drain in Florida, everybody in your neighborhood is going to have 2 feet at least of water sitting in their house. So make sure before the storm, and even during the storm, if it's safe to do so, clear out those storm drains, make sure that water can drain freely, and hopefully it can minimize the flood threat enough. But likely the ground's not going to be able to keep up with it, and we are going to be seeing significant flooding, likely high water rescues going on somewhere across that heavy rainfall band across the north central region of Florida there, north of the I-4. Anything else you wanted to add on, Derek, before we head on out this evening?
I think tomorrow's live we should go over the tornado threat as well, but I think that this should be good enough for tonight.
Yeah, I would agree, just because the most important part with the hurricane is the flooding. Hurricane tornadoes are generally more isolated events, but this one does look a little bit more widespread, but that's going to be more of a day of situation we want to cover as we're looking at radar imagery as outer bands are starting to make landfall. So that is something we're going to be looking at on live radar tomorrow as outer bands are starting to make their way onshore of Florida. So as long as there's nothing else to add on, have a great night, everybody, and we will see you tomorrow or the day after.
See ya.